Welcome and hello everyone. My name is Karen Huang and I'm the Senior Director of Individual and Major Giving at the Fine Arts Museum San Francisco. As always, I want to begin our program today by sharing my gratitude on behalf of everyone at the Fine Arts Museum for your ongoing support and enthusiasm. Your support and participation have carried us through one of the most challenging and predictable years we've experienced. So thank you. And it's been so great seeing some of you back at our museums. Both the Legion and DeYoung are now open. Today we have here with us Bjorn Amelan and Laura Camerlengo for a virtual discussion about Patrick Kelly in anticipation of our upcoming exhibition, Patrick Kelly, Runway of Love, which will be on view this October. Before we begin, I want to remind you of the format of this program. We will kick things off with a brief presentation, followed by a 20-minute conversation with Bjorn and Laura. We will then have 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. We are set up as a Zoom meetings, as you can tell, so you will have the option to be on camera and directing your questions to Bjorn and Laura. Please note that during the presentation and the conversation, we will be muting all attendees. If you have any technical issues, please message Lindsay Stoll. Her name will also have FAMSF next to it. So please send her a chat message if you have any issues. And with that, I am delighted to introduce our two speakers today. Bjorn Amelan was born on August 4th, 1955 in Haifa, Israel, of a French mother and Israeli father. After childhood spent traveling, he graduated from high school in Haifa in 1973 and moved to Paris, where he became a fashion photographer agent, representing, among others, Horst P. Horst, William Klein, Gianpaolo Barbieri, and Dominique Eiserman. Amelan met Patrick Kelly in late 1982 and became his life and business partner from early 1983 until Kelly's death on January 1st, 1990. He met Billy T. Jones in February 1992 and became his life partner in August 1993. They were married in August 2014. He designed numerous sets for the Billy T. Jones / Arnie Zane Company since 1996 and is currently pursuing his career as a visual artist. Laura Camerlengo is Associate Curator of Costume and Textile Arts at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco. Since 2010, she has curated or co-curated costume and textile exhibitions for the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco and the Philadelphia Museum of Art. She most recently co-curated the critically acclaimed exhibition, Contemporary Muslim Fashions. She's the author of The Miser's Purse, as well as a contributor to the catalogs Degas' Impressionism and the Paris Millinery Trade and Contemporary Muslim Fashions. She holds a Master's of Art in the History of Decorative Arts and Design from Parsons, the New School of Design, in partnership with the Cooper Hewitt in New York. So now with that, I turn it over to Laura and Bjorn.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Karen, and thank you all for joining us today. I am delighted to share with you our upcoming special exhibition, Patrick Kelly, Runway of Love, and I'm especially thrilled and deeply honored to have with us Bjorn Amelan. I hope today's conversation offers you a very intimate look at the late fashion designer and the upcoming exhibition of his work at the DeYoung Museum. So I'll start, as Karen mentioned, with a brief overview about the exhibition and the catalog, and then we'll dive into our conversation. Patrick Kelly, Runway of Love celebrates the career of the late Black fashion designer Patrick Kelly, who lived from 1954 to 1990. Kelly was born and raised in Vicksburg, Mississippi by his mother and his grandmother, who helped foster a love of fashion by bringing him home fashion magazines as a child. After time in Atlanta and New York, he moved to Paris in late 1979 and founded his company in 1985. By 1988, he had become the first American and the first Black designer to be voted into the prestigious Chambre Syndicale, the French Fashion Industry Association and Standards Organization. Kelly was lauded with such accolades while being and remaining one of the few designers to ever directly address issues of race and systemic racism in his work. His brilliant vision and career were cut short by complications from AIDS, to which he succumbed on January 1st, 1990. This exhibition was presented by the Philadelphia Museum of Art in 2014, where it was organized by Dilys Blum, Senior Curator of Costume and Textile Arts, and the late Monica Brown, Senior Collection Assistant, And I have to give a shout out, Dilys is with us today as an audience member as well. At the time, I served as exhibition assistant within the costume and textiles department. And in that role, I helped with exhibition research and public outreach, including conducting oral histories of many of Kelly's friends and former colleagues. The exhibition situates Patrick Kelly and his designs in the broader context of art, fashion, and Black histories by exploring the inspirations and influences in his designs, their connection to his significant collection of racist memorabilia, whose images he wrested to tell his own story, and footage from his exuberant fashion shows. The exhibition presents an entirely new scholarship formed by extensive archival research, academic study, object analysis, and the oral histories, as I mentioned. So when you come to the museum this fall, you will see 80 fully accessorized ensembles dating from 1983 to 1990 from the Philadelphia Museum of Art's Patrick Kelly Archive. The museum was given this archive by Bjorn and the dancer and choreographer Bill T. Jones. Our presentation at the Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco will also include Patrick Kelly ensembles and jewelry from our own costume collection, which are incoming gifts to our holdings from Kelly's friends and collaborators. These include Elizabeth, Miss Liz Goodrum, who's his former assistant, and Audrey Smaltz, who's the famed runway show producer. We will also uniquely feature some of Patrick Kelly's design sketches, which are on loan to our museums from the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. These materials were also generously given to that institution by Bjorn. You see one sketch on the left here of the Black performer and activist Josephine Baker, who was a muse to Patrick Kelly. On the right, you see the finished ensemble, which was worn by Pat Cleveland in the runway presentation and is now in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. This garment will be on view in our presentation, along with video showing an exuberant Pat Cleveland dancing down the runway. And there's also an extended essay in the exhibition's catalog on this ensemble and Pat's performance. The exhibition themes dovetail with the catalog's content and include explorations of Patrick Kelly's career and fashion training and knowledge by Dilys Blum. Indeed, Patrick Kelly had a comprehensive knowledge of fashion history, and he often challenged himself to design better than the established designers like Coco Chanel. I know many of you are fashion enthusiasts, and I'm sure the Patrick Kelly suit on the right reminds you of a Coco Chanel suit. In fact, it was his homage to Chanel. You can see he's given it a more youthful silhouette, bright colors, and of course, the inclusion of his multicolored buttons, which were a design signature. And we'll talk to you more about that today. Additional essays and exhibition themes will address how Black church culture and queer experiences impacted Kelly's designs. In the catalog, these are addressed by essays by Darnell Jamal Lisby and Eric Donnell Pritchard. We also look at the performative aspects of Patrick Kelly's work, from developing his brand and branding to his exuberant and highly performative runway presentations. And the latter is addressed in the catalog in an essay by Sequoia Barnes, who serves as our advising scholar for our presentation. There is also an essay about Kelly's collecting and reappropriation of racist memorabilia and racialized imagery. In the text, this is addressed by Madison Moore, and we explore it in the exhibition as well. Here, I want to acknowledge that the collecting of racist memorabilia has been widely contested within and beyond Black communities for decades, including in Patrick Kelly's time and today as well. The scholar and public intellectual Henry Louis Gage Jr. summarized these diverging viewpoints in an article on racist memorabilia for PBS. He said, quote, "I often encounter two strong and diametrically opposed reactions from African Americans towards this material. Some can't seem to amass enough examples of these quote unquote collectibles or quote unquote memorabilia. Others think that the whole lot should be assembled into one gigantic bonfire, incinerated, and the ashes buried in an impenetrable vault," end quote. Patrick Kelly was unapologetic about his practice of collecting and reappropriating this imagery into his designs and brand. He believed it was necessary to know one's history and to claim it and reclaim it to move forward. His racial provocations manifested, among other ways, in his bandana dresses, watermelon jewelry and accessories, which you see here, ubiquitous Black baby doll brooches, and his Gollywog logo, which appeared throughout his branding. As I mentioned, throughout the exhibition narrative, as well as in the catalog, we have many oral histories that offer unique insights on Patrick Kelly, his life, his work, and his legacy. And here I'm including some personal snapshots that were submitted with some of the oral histories as a sneak peek of the exhibition content, or the catalog content, I should say. As mentioned, these oral histories come from a lot of Patrick Kelly's friends and colleagues. Bjorn has contributed to this as well. We have contributions from the supermodel Pat Cleveland, who was also a friend of Patrick Kelly's. And there's a very special contribution by the famed former Vogue fashion editor, Andre Leon Talley. I know many of you, again, are fashion enthusiasts. And so I thought, as a sneak peek of the catalog, I would read you a passage from Andre Leon Talley's essay before we embark on our conversation. And it's just a snippet. But as I'm sure you all know, Andre has a great turn of phrase. He writes, quote, "Kelly, and I knew him well, was a wonderful man. His spirit was pure. He could charm you into a world of Black Southernness. He collected Black memorabilia, Aunt Jemima cookie jars, Uncle Ben's posters, little black dolls, everything that had to do with Southern Black folklore. He celebrated the revisionist Gollywog doll, transforming it into a symbol of pride, and drawing from that world of folklore, he turned it into his own personal aesthetic. He used buttons as decorative trim. Integral to his many simple tube-like sheets, buttons were used to design motifs, messages, and shapes. For example, red buttons were sewn on a simple black dress to create hearts. Multicolored buttons were embroidered to create a big heart torso." He continues, quote, "It was a thrill to attend a fashion show and see the mannequins strike a pose in Kelly's creations. And it took a young African-American gay man from Vicksburg, Mississippi, to create such a world of wonder. It was a joy to know Patrick Kelly, a man of great athletic build, with a smile that seemed like it was as generous as warm butter on toast," end quote. And with that, we'll segue into our conversation with Bjorn. Thank you, Bjorn, again for joining us today. We're so happy to have you with us to talk about Patrick and his work. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Oh, hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
I'm very, very happy to see this exhibition realized. It has been a dream of mine for many years since Patrick died to make sure that his legacy was perpetrated. And I think this exhibition is going to be a very major landmark to that effect. So thank you, Laura, for spearheading this. And thank you to the Young and its staff for making it possible.
Our pleasure. So I thought we would start at the beginning. And I thought maybe you could tell us a bit about your background prior to meeting Patrick and how you came to live and work in Paris.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. One question, just I'm seeing Tukey Smith and Patrick on my screen, and
yes,
that's all I'm seeing. So I'm wondering if that's meant to be.
That's fine. We could stop the share and then you can see everyone who's joining us.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
No problem.
Yes, well, as Lindsay said in the introduction, I was born in Israel. My father traveled a lot for his work. So as a kid, I traveled a lot. I graduated at 18 and in Israel, but knew I didn't want to live there. So having the dual nationality, I moved to Paris and eventually found my way as a photographer's agent, which is what I was doing when I first met Patrick, who had arrived to Paris a couple of years earlier. So yes, that's in a nutshell my background by the time I met Patrick.
So you met in 1982 and you became partners in early 1983.
Yes.
And you had your own very successful career. What inspired you to help him achieve what had been his lifelong goal of becoming a fashion designer?
Well, in a nutshell, I think it was love, actually. I was in love with Patrick. His dream was very clear and his dedication to that dream. He was a very hard worker. He was struggling at the time when I met him because he had arrived in Paris and had a couple of different jobs, but being an American arriving in Paris with no papers to work and no money behind him or anything. As a matter of fact, his friend Pat Cleveland had anonymously left him a one-way ticket to Paris after she had met with him, chatted with him in New York and told him as his career in New York wasn't going much places, she had told him, why don't you go to Paris? And he said, how shall I go to Paris? And that afternoon, he found a one-way ticket to Paris, which he always assumed had been given him by Pat. And she confirmed it after he died, but she always she never acknowledged it while he was alive. So yes, I was in love with Patrick. His dream was to be a fashion designer. And of course, I had some connections because the photographers I was representing were very prominent in the field. And of course, I spoke French and he didn't. Both things that I assumed helped. But after, so Audrey Smalls, whose photo you showed and whom you mentioned, who was the person who organized with Patrick every single show that we had, so she was very close to Patrick, had helped him find a freelance job at Roberta Di Camerino's, at the time rather well-known, though already less known than she had been earlier, designer based in Venice. So he did a couple of collections for her, or rather he gave her sketches for a couple of collections. And one day he came very, very excited to my place, which was, he always kept his place, but it was our place. And he said that he had found a lot of tubular jersey, multicolored cotton tubular jersey at a flea market in Paris. They were costing 1,000 francs. I remember that very clearly. And so he wanted to buy those. So we bought those jerseys and he made a first series of unhemmed with the seam showing and some ornaments, buttons, bows, tubular jersey dresses in multicolor. And then he said to me, and that was his idea, that he knew of a store called Victoire in Paris, where the fashion director, Françoise Chassagnac, was quite well known for having discovered the likes of Montana and other designers, and asked me if I could organize a meeting with Françoise Chassagnac. We went to that meeting with a model because Patrick believed that dresses should be seen worn rather than flat. And there was this beautiful African-American model, Jeanette Chandler was her name, who was close to Patrick and became kind of a house model for him, dressing and undressing in front of the director of Victoire and François Chassagnac, who were sharing an office. Patrick being his exuberant self, they told me later they had never seen any such presentation. And they bought the dresses and said, and actually a few days later, I got a call from François Chassagnac telling me that we should meet Nicole Crassade, who was then the editor, the fashion editor for Elle, French Elle magazine. I set up a meeting. Nicole was scheduled to come. I remember this very clearly at 10 o'clock in the morning. Patrick had worked the night before in his little one-bedroom apartment near Saint-Germain to prepare for sketches and things for her coming. I arrived at 10:15 to be there translating and helping him. Patrick opened the door, panicked and said, "She's here." She had arrived early from another appointment. And she looked through everything. The model came, showed her the dresses. She called me a few days after that and said that she wanted to do an L story on Patrick, which ended up being 6 pages in the February issue of '85, to be photographed by Oliviero Toscani, the very famous photographer who was mostly known at the time for the often controversial Benetton advertising campaigns. So it was a big deal. We went to the L studio. Patrick and Toscani hit it off. As a matter of fact, Oliviero Toscani asked Patrick to be in the photos with the models. And the 6-page spread came out in mid-February. In March were the fashion shows every year in March, the fall-winter fashion shows. And as the 6 pages in Elle appeared, we spoke with the Victoire people, asking them what should we do next? And they told us that they had rented the space above their own space, planning to expand their offices upstairs. They were not planning to do so immediately, so we could use that space. And if we presented a small collection for the March Fashion Week, they would produce and sell for us, oversee the logistics of selling that collection. We were for 2 years in that space. There never was a contract between Victoire and us. It was only on a handshake. It was the most wonderful relation, and one which I doubt is possible these days with the corporatization of the whole fashion world. But with the help of Patrick, was quite well known, particularly among African-American models. When they came to Paris, they stopped at Patrick's and always were welcomed there. He gave them dresses. And we did a fashion show in that little railroad style, 4 rooms that made like a square. And there was 1 dressing room and 3 rooms where Patrick insisted that we rent little gold chair, which for him represented French couture. And Dawn Mello, then fashion director for Bergdorf Goodman, came, bought not only the collection we were showing, which was the one Victoire would produce for the following winter, but asked also for quite a large number of the same dresses that had been in Elle magazine, for which we had no production. So Patrick sewed every one of those dresses on his portable Singer machine for us to deliver to Bergdorf Goodman. Bergdorf put those dresses on their 57th Street windows, and the career was launched.
And you were up and running.
We were up and running.
It sounds like quite the whirlwind.
It was a whirlwind. Well, everything was a whirlwind because Patrick died, as you said, on January 1st of 1990. The first collection was shown in March of 85. The last collection was shown in March of 89 as Patrick went to the hospital in August of that year and stayed there until he died. So it was a whirlwind, indeed.
So Patrick is known to have had a wide array of influences for his designs. He was inspired by his upbringing, certainly in the southern United States, being born and raised in Vicksburg, Mississippi. He also had experiences in the club scenes in New York and Paris, and he was very knowledgeable about fashion, art, and Black histories, and also popular culture. I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about his creative process and what it was like to see him to create and to design.
Yes, first about yes, he was extremely knowledgeable of fashion. He was passionate by that. As you mentioned, he had started dreaming about fashion from magazines that his grandmother, who worked as a house help in various houses, would bring back home when those ladies for whom she worked were discarding the magazines. But Patrick always said that while he loved, and he truly did, Yves Saint Laurent, Givenchy, and Madame Grey, and so on, he said there was more fashion in one pew of a church in Vicksburg on a Sunday than there would be in a whole fashion show of any one of the great designers. And that stayed with him, as did the fact that as a probably rather wild kid, he would rip off the buttons from his clothes, and his grandmother would sew back the buttons, but not having the same. She would sew mismatched button, which inspired his multicolored buttons that he used throughout. And when he worked, because for the first 2 years of our relationship, before the March 85 launch, he kept trying to be working in existing fashion houses. And he would spend, for some reason, it was always last minute. I would beg him to prepare it earlier, but whether it was a collection that he freelanced doing for Benetton, I think in 88 or 89, or whether it was preparing for an appointment with one of the houses in Paris, it always ended up being done the night before, which meant we spent the night not sleeping. And he made a point of always creating a portfolio of designs that would be adjusted to the designer he was applying to. And I think this exercise really deepens his knowledge of the various styles in fashion and the various styles of creators in fashion. A knowledge which he absorbed, and as you were mentioning, is inspiration for Chanel. Very typically, there was a whole passage in that fashion show that was an homage to Chanel, and he called that passage Coucou Chanel. So he really had always this desire that dresses should make you smile. Dresses should impart, there was enough sadness for him in the world. And I think that there was enough sadness in him personally that he wanted to project the opposite. And his whole demeanor and attitude and seduction, I think, seductiveness, stemmed from this forward momentum. And when someone was long-faced and looking sad, he had no patience for it. Snap out of it, he would say. And I think that his collections and creations were looking at that and trying to convey that approach.
Well, and I think that's something interesting to consider in the context of also the significant collection of racist memorabilia that he formed while living in Paris. This collection grew to have examples of advertising, dolls, knickknacks, and household products, which manifested racist stereotypes. Can you tell
vanished.
us?
I can't hear you. I don't know why.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Laura, I can still hear you.
Okay.
Bjorn, can you hear us now?
Now I can hear who was speaking.
Okay.
I hear you, Laura, yes.
Okay, good. So much of this material manifested racist stereotypes. And I'm curious to know if you could tell us how he came to collect this material, especially because you've mentioned in other interviews, such as with Vice magazine, that he had grown up seeing such imagery in Mississippi as a child. And so it seems almost remarkable that he would collect it and come to live with it and keep it in the studio as well.
You know, well, I can say how it started. And Patrick's birthday was September 24th. And I think it was the second year of our relationship, so that would have been 84. I was looking for a present for his birthday. Birthdays were very important to Patrick. So I was looking for a present, and I went to the flea market where we always went, or regularly went on weekends, looking for something. Now you have to realize I am who I am. You can see what I am. And did not know much about, I had read about American racism, I knew a little bit, but I didn't know much of the deep history of American racism. So I went to the flea market looking for a present and found what looked to be a very funny ashtray that was a black man's face with an open mouth, a pointed red tongue that you could take out and crush a cigarette. And you could also put the cigarette into the mouth, and through the nostrils that were holes, there came out the smoke. It was a beautiful piece of porcelain with, of course, as we all know, a hideous background. But at the time, all I could see was a funny piece of porcelain, which I bought for Patrick as his birthday gift. He opened his birthday. He never told me anything about what I'm sure he knew it was, but he said, we will start collecting these. He loved it. We will start collecting these. And from that point on, we would regularly, whether we were in Los Angeles, in New York, or wherever we were when we found Black memorabilia, as I believe there, which is one of the names of the things, we would purchase them. And Patrick's, you know, I think there's something queer, being queer, being in your face, wanting not to hide, but rather to push forward. Patrick always said, if you don't know where you're coming from, you don't know where you might be going. And this appropriation, rather than tucking under the carpet and wanting to hide, was, I think, a hallmark of this entire approach, which, as I now know and realize, of course, and I learned a lot about it after Patrick died, not much more than I knew while he was alive. So I think a lot of that was what it was about. And so he made the logo of the house this black gollywog face, which he drew. It stood on the plaque, or is it stood on the wall in front of the entrance of our showroom after we moved from the showroom Victoire had given us in early 87, before the March 87 shows. We moved to what was our last showroom, a much larger, nicer space in the Marais area of Paris. And yes, so that's, I think, is the story of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love you also connecting it to queer practice. And also we could think about him as being part of a larger lineage of Black artists like Betty Scar or Robert Colescott, who also have used the material as a launch point to address issues of racism and to tell personal stories as well. And I think, you know, Patrick was so knowledgeable about so many things. I think it's interesting to think about that too. I'm curious to know if we could talk about Patrick's broad appeal, because one thing that's always impressed me was the fact that his clients range from women age 18 to women age 80, and that he catered not only to many diverse types of women, but also the Hollywood and international elite, like the iconic actor Bette Davis and Princess Diana. What was it about Patrick's designs that made them so appealing to such a variety of women?
You know, I think we have to flash back to the mid-80s when fashion was dominated by the Japanese, very cerebral, very intellectual approach to fashion, with muted colors, grays and earth, whatever. And suddenly there is this charming, charismatic, wanting to project an image of happiness, multicolored, inclusiveness, designer who burst unapologetically on the scene. I think that is a source of identification that women felt. Patrick always promoted the fact that he didn't believe that a pretty woman had to be slender or young. He thought that the most daring women were actually women who were older, because he would say that nobody else could wear a full white suit with white patent leather shoes and look good except an older woman. And so I think that people felt that. It came across with interviews. I know that Bette Davis, our meeting with Bette Davis was fortuitous because the young woman, Catherine Cermak, who had been her beloved assistant, had left Bette Davis to come to Paris and applied and came to work for us for no pay, because everybody was working for practically no pay at the very beginning of the line. Of course, afterwards it became institutionalized, but at the beginning it wasn't. And Catherine would get called from one Miss D, and we didn't know who she was until it was revealed to us that it was Bette Davis, whom Catherine had worked for. And one day, Catherine told us that Miss D was coming to Paris on her way to Germany. She would stop by to visit Catherine. It was at Christmas time. I believe it was Christmas of 84 or 85, I don't remember. And I said, well, we're going to invite everybody from the showroom and friends to our home for Christmas Eve dinner. Would they like to come? She checked with Miss D and accepted the invitation. Miss D came, everybody was very intimidated. Miss D Catherine instructed me that Miss D did not want to be served the food first. And at a certain point, Miss D said that it was time for them to leave. And Patrick said, oh, you can't leave before you taste my peach cobbler, which he was baking. And Miss D said, yes, okay, I'll stay for the peach cobbler. And they became friends that way. And she, from that point on, promoted even on David Letterman, Patrick. As a matter of fact, as we were in New York in 87, in the late spring of 87, negotiating with a huge conglomerate, Warner Co., a licensing deal, I got a call from Catherine telling me that she and Miss D were in New York and that she was going on David Letterman that evening. asking me if it was okay that she wore a Patrick Kelly dress, which of course I said yes. Then she said, would it be okay? Because Patrick always had his pockets filled with little black plastic dolls. They were about this size. And he had students come and with a glue gun, glue brooches, safety pins in the back of those so that they could be worn as brooches. And he would have his pockets of his overall, which he always wore, filled with those dolls, which he handed anyone he met. It could be a custom official as he at the airport, or it could be people that he met just all the time. And so Ms. D asked me, would it be okay that if she gave such a doll to David Letterman, which I said yes. And the third call came, they really literally came a few minutes into that, where she asked if it would be okay if she mentioned that we were in New York looking for backing, to which I said yes as well. And the following day, Linda Walkner, then chairperson and CEO of Warnaco, walked into this meeting where I was sitting with the lawyer whom we had hired to help us in the negotiation, while the Warnaco people were sitting with their army of lawyers. It was all very serious and very grim, actually. And Linda Walkner walked in and said, I hear that Bette Davis was on David Letterman yesterday saying that you are looking for a backer. Well, you found it. And we signed a deal with Warnaco.
And that was history. That's amazing. And I think also it's so amazing too to think about how in a few short years you went from essentially what we would call in San Francisco a startup to a company that I believe in '89 had hit $5 million or was expected to hit 5 million or so in revenue.
I mean, think it was more than that, actually.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
Yeah, it was remarkable and it was meteorical. And there was an aspect of, which Patrick always promoted as well, of fairy tale in it, like the story of Bette Davis, like these fortuitous encounters, like the Pat Cleveland one-way ticket to Paris. I don't know. If you believe in karma, I guess you can take it there. But there was something about Patrick that was a magnet. And once he found the angle to enter into a path towards success, it zoomed very, very fast and very intensely. And with a lot, Patrick was a very, very hard worker. I mean, I would leave the showroom oftentimes at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, and Patrick would get home back at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, having worked. So there was a lot of hard work behind his success.
So I'm going to ask one final question, and then we'll segue to our Q&A because I see we're getting some questions in the chat. I'm curious to know if you could talk a little bit about the induction into the Chambre Syndicale. He became the first American and the first Black designer to be accepted. That is a tremendous accolade that's often cited when he comes up in stories and in press. But one thing we don't get to hear is what that meant to Patrick. And I'm curious to know if you could provide that perspective.
Oh, it was a dream come true. Pierre Berger, the partner of, who was the head of the Chambre Syndicale and the partner of Yves Saint Laurent, and Sonia Riquiel were the two sponsors of Patrick's acceptance to the Chambre Syndicale. And with it came at that time, fashion shows for Chambre Syndicale members and a few guests who were big names in other countries, basically, were held at the Louvre in the Cour Carré, the square courtyard, which is in the back of the building of the Louvre, where tents were erected every season for fashion shows. And so Patrick was invited to do a fashion show, his fashion show at the Louvre, whereas until then we had been, like many people, renting in a hotel or this or that space to have our fashion show. To that end, he found on the street, actually, an artist whom he asked to create a series of Mona Lisa-like drawings, each drawing representing a theme of that collection. So there was one theme of the collection where dice, another theme were stars. So there were a series of Mona Lisa drawings in a folded out invitation to mark our showing at the Louvre. The last of those was a caricature of Patrick Kelly himself, and it was called Mississippi Lisa. I think it was a source of immense pride and joy for Patrick. It was very, very significant.
Thank you. So, Karen, do we want to segue over to take some of the questions in the chat?
Absolutely. I'm happy to start with questions in the chat. And I think after that, we can raise our hands and I can call on you if you have any questions. But we'll start with the chat, which just one question in chat, which was from Ellen. What was Patrick's personality like?
Well, I think I spoke a little bit to it. It is this quite incredible mixture of openness, seductiveness, and charm, very self-conscious. But I realized more than ever after Patrick's passing, but even while he was alive, that within 5 minutes you thought you knew Patrick and everything about him. And years later, you realize that actually you did know very little about him. There was an enormous hidden aspect to both his history, his biography, of which I, through the year, knew little, actually. Again, I found out a lot of things after he died, but I knew little. And yet you thought that you knew Patrick so well. So there was this ambiguousness, which was remarkable. He was a very, very intelligent man with a very little education in the formal sense of the word, but with an enormous capacity to understand in a profound way things. Totally not articulate as far as putting his thoughts in verbalizing his thoughts. His thoughts were expressed in action. They were not expressed verbally. And I always remember how being in the section of our showroom, which was the atelier where the seamstresses, the pattern maker, his right hand, Rashida, was working. I always remember when during Fashion Week, as the buyers were all in our showroom, him saying to me, let me go out and tap dance for them. So he knew exactly what he was doing, but it was very sincere at the same time.
Fantastic. Well, with that, I want to thank Bjorn and Laura for your time and incredible insights. I feel like I know so much about Patrick and very much look forward to Patrick Kelly, Runway of Love, which will open on October 23rd, 2021 and run through April 24th, 2022. And we look forward to having all of your support and your attendance at the exhibition. And it's just so happy to have your support and see you all here. And as one final reminder, our wonderful museums, the De Young and the Legion of Honor, are both open. So make your advance tickets and I'll hope to see you in the galleries. Have a great evening, everyone.